For today's critical thought, we're going to be talking about how two very different live service games basically create a situation of having an open revolt between their community and the challenges and dangers when you're building a game around multiple different kind of consumer bases and how that can blow up very spectacularly, not in your favor. For once in these critical thoughts, everything is kind of nice and segmented in terms of our topics. So we're going to start with Dead by Daylight. Now, Dead by Daylight has had a very long-standing issue when it comes to kind of keeping its different core player bases happy between the survivors and the killers. And the game has had these cycles of, okay, killers are overpowered, now the survivors, now the killers. And this has kind of gone on since the beginning of the game. And a very major issue the game has had, or two of the major issues, one has been trying to put a pin in what does a default match of Dead by Daylight supposed to look like, between what the survivors can do and what the killers can do. The other problem has been trying to curtail kind of more powerful tactics that both sides have had. And this really came to a head when it was announced for their kind of public test branch, or the PDB, some major changes to the game that basically completely altered how killers were supposed to play. And that is slugging and tunneling. Slugging is the act of basically hitting the survivors and knocking them down so they can't get up. And if you knock all four of them down, they don't have any perks to kind of automatically get them up. The game is over. Or it becomes so nice and neat. They just go over, grab a survivor, put them on a hook. Grab a survivor, put them on a hook. You get the picture. Now, tunneling is when you just focus down a single survivor one after another, basically going from a 4 versus 1 to a 3 versus 1, which is obviously easier. And survivors have complained about these tactics for years. And the patch was designed to effectively hardly punish someone for doing both. For tunneling, what it did was once you put someone on a hook, you can no longer see their status. And if you hook the same survivor twice, well, first off, it becomes a lot harder to do so because they'll gain a bunch of perks once they're removed from a hook. And if you kill a survivor while the other survivors haven't been hooked enough times, the rest of the team gets a massive boost for the remainder of the match. To stop slugging, they basically now, or they were going to allow every survivor to basically get the option to pick themselves back up. Not only that, but they can also crawl faster, thereby getting away from the killer, making it harder that if you leave someone on the ground too long, they'll just, crawl away, and then there's nothing you can do about it. And people were not happy about this, or should I say specifically, the killers were not happy about this. Survivors were jumping for joy at all these changes. They were talking about on the forums that, haha, your time has come and all that. And the patch onto their public, the public beta test servers, and people hated it. And Behavior announced, not even after like a day or so, that they're removing those changes they were planning and they're going to try and go back to the drawing board. So now the killers are happy and the survivors are upset. And it is a very tricky situation all around. And it goes to some of the major challenges when it comes to having different communities of players in your games. That you really have to be careful with how much you favor or change things for one side over the other. The advantages that killers are going to get in this patch, it basically amount to if you hook a different survivor each time, you gain a small buff. It is nowhere near the same kind of game-changing impact that the tunneling and slugging effects were going to have. And a lot of people just really didn't like how that looked. The other point, and this is one that was brought up by kind of the expert players, is that for people who are already really damn good at Dead by Daylight, these changes are annoying, but they're passable. They can be kind of played around. For people who are new or learning the game, it's just basically another, knife in the back to trying to learn this game as someone who's new or starting out. Not only you have to learn how the killer works, but now you're having to deal with all these additional rules that go with it. And it was pretty much, for a lot of people, going to be that straw that broke the camel's back. And one of the more important lessons I think a lot of people, especially the Survivor mains, weren't really thinking about or they chose to ignore was, in an asymmetrical game, in this respect, 4 is not greater than 1. If half of the players or half of the kind of design people don't want to do, then there's no multiplayer. If people don't want to play as killers anymore, the game is, well, pun intended, dead. And it's going to be dead a lot earlier than when daylight comes. And when we talk about these kinds of challenges, again, as we've said, one of the most important things you want to establish when it comes to a multiplayer live service game like this is, what is the standard kind of form of play? Is it supposed to be a killer versus a heavily coordinated team of survivors all using Discord and all that? Is it supposed to be a killer versus 4 completely random people? What can the killer do? What can a survivor do? And if you don't do this, it leads to these situations where the game is just constantly changing. And this is not the same as a kind of competitive or a kind of meta-focused game like a CCG or a hero-based shooter, where you can have these multiplayer changes that shift, okay, this character's now weaker, this character is stronger. In a game like this, when you have 2 very opposed sides, it has to be enjoyable to play as both. And you can certainly argue that being able to just tunnel or slug the entire team and they have no recourse about it is not all that great. But there has to be something for the killer to do. There has to be, again, give and take in this respect, because if there's not, then people get annoyed and they're not going to want to play. And again, with a game that is as old as Dead by Daylight at this point, making these monumental changes is a very hard ask on your player base. It is essentially completely redoing how a killer is supposed to play after so many years of it being out. And unless you improve the onboarding, and again, give something to the killers to kind of augment or kind of balance this out, it comes off as you just focusing on one side of your player base. And that point is going to come back up in a minute when we switch to our next game. So, as I'm recording this, the changes have been removed, players are still arguing between themselves, and it's still kind of unknown how/when or if this will come back in some form in the future. But I think it's safe to say that there's probably going to be another kind of major patch upheaval of Dead by Daylight at some point. But what that means for either side kind of remains to be seen. So with that, let's switch over to Marvel Contest of Champions that had a very, very horrible first week of September. This has to do with them changing and restructuring a lot of their monthly content. During the summer, the game ran through different betas of kind of like a new tier of monthly challenges, the Valiant Gauntlet, sorry about that. And the different versions each had different ways of playing, and it was kind of like a lot of people were liking one form, not liking the other. And the problem for some was that it became kind of an account challenge. Do you have 17 answers for a very specific set of nodes all tied to a single class? Yes or no? And the answer is no, you cannot do this. And one of their iterations, I was actually able to do it 100%. That was the third one. And people were all excited about what this meant going forward. And they announced plans to go with what they call adaptive difficulty for this content going forward. And it has to do with another kind of metric for a player's accounts, prestige. Prestige originally is tied or was tied to your top 5 champions and any relics attached to them. Whatever is your highest 5, that is your rating. And certain champions are rated higher or lower. The idea is that like the super meta, completely broken characters are worth less prestige than some of the harder to find or more obscure characters. And for most of the content of the game, this didn't really matter. It was, of course, important for alliances or their guild versus guild content, but for most players, who cared? But all that changed in September with the adaptive difficulty. So now, you're higher the prestige, you get more rewards from the event quests. If your prestige is low, you get fewer rewards. Now, if you're already a very max and well-stocked account, you're going to get probably more stuff for it, and you're really not going to feel it. If you're on the lower side, however, you feel it quite a bit. For my account, I don't even know what my prestige level was at before, but I can tell you where it is at now. I am at the bottom of the bottom of the bottom tier when it comes to prestige, so I'm not going to be seeing super fancy rewards for some time. And people were annoyed and frustrated, and they were kind of willing to overlook it to some extent. Then they tried the adaptive difficulty, and they found characters with stats so boosted that it felt almost like endgame content for what was supposed to be the relaxing monthly quests. The first quest on the harder mode, they hit so hard that unless you have a fully ranked or close to fully ranked character, more than likely you would be one shot out of a combo. It was supposed to be that they do only 10% of bleed damage. It's supposed to be you get a big 90% off. The bleed damage was still so high that for most characters, they still died from it within a few seconds of having it on. And people were very upset. For everyone who doesn't have a Super Whale account, it felt like a colossal punch in the face, because this quest is supposed to be the main way to slowly but surely earn the resources and rank of material you need to maybe have a small, kind of, almost chance to compete with the big leagues. So when I try to do some of the PvP, there are times where I'm matched with someone with 15 characters at 7-star rank 3 or above. The highest power level in the game right now is rank 4, and a 7-star. And I know that person spent a lot of money to get to that point, and that's not trying to throw shade. There's literally not enough resources in the game to have more than 1 or 2 characters at rank 4 unless you get really good at some of the end game content, but it takes a long time, especially if you're a free player. And this presented, or it kind of exacerbated, one of the major issues that Concept Champions has had. That there is a huge disparity between the free players, the late to mid spenders, and the people who will consistently spend hundreds, if not 1,000 plus, during each and every sale. And while people are fine, no, they're not going to be competing with the super whales, when the content gets adjusted so heavily in one direction, and there's no other recourse, or there was no other recourse to kind of get around that, it just feels like you're cutting out a good portion of your player base from ever progressing, or worse, forcing them to spend money just to have a snippet or a smidge of a chance to get past it. And people were really upset. Kabam just basically disappeared for the first week of September. No one heard anything from them from the forums, and a lot of people were saying that this would be the biggest death nail in the game. And then they released a bit of news in a very surprising twist. They announced that they're going to completely readjust the stats and everything for the event quests. And if you manage to do most of the event quests before they do the reset, you can essentially earn 2 months of rewards in the span of 1 month. You do the first 2 weeks of it on the horror version, and then for the rebounds, you can get those same rewards again. And to be perfectly frank, I was not expecting to hear that. In fact, the video that you're watching right now, this is the second recording that I did on this topic. I did the first one Sunday night. I was going to get all sub to go Thursday or Friday, and they dropped this bit of news on Tuesday and just completely had me have to throw out that record footage. But that's actually a really good thing, And if you're a fan of MCOC, you probably know that Kabam more often than not doesn't choose like the best option when it comes to making their consumer base or making the free or light spenders happy. And this is probably the best possible solution to a problem that, well, of course, they created. And again, as with the first part of our video, it goes with one of the more important points that when you're dealing with multiple consumer bases, multiple kinds of consumers, you need to make sure that everyone has some kind of option. With the Dead by Daylight example, I forgot to mention this, but one of the things that the game has really needed for some time is a way to separate the truly hardcore, super competitive crowds from everyone else. This is why most games have a competitive mode, or a ranked mode, or a pro mode, or some kind of mode. With the same thing goes with Concept Champions, that because of their whole guild and their battleground slash PvP mode, everyone is just kind of all fighting together. And it's why a lot of people on the kind of later or free-to-play side will focus on the story-based content, because that stuff is supposed to be equal for everyone. That if you are not the super top accounts or on the best alliances, you can still do the monthly challenges, the side quests, and the story mode, and get some decent rewards and push forward. But when they made that change and they completely upended one of their best ways for free players to make some progress each month, it did feel like a betrayal in the same way as changing how a killer is supposed to play in Dead by Daylight. And when you're trying to appease these groups, again, it is a very hard challenge. Of course, if you're probably wondering, all the whales on the forums for Concept Champions, they were like, I don't care about this, it's easy for me. All those people are just complaining, that they haven't spent enough money to have an account as good as mine, and all the meta-breaking characters. And you have to be really careful when it comes to listening to only your hardcore fan base, and especially only your whales. As we've talked about, when it comes to live service games, you need to have a healthy influx of players. You want your casual players to be playing the game long enough to become core players. You want your core players to invest enough to maybe go to the hardcore, semi-hardcore level. Because if you lose all of that, for whatever reason, you're only going to be left with those super whales. And while that may not be the worst thing for some of these games, it is often the death nail for a live service title. When someone just comes on and realizes, there is no way I will ever be able to do anything in this game unless I just close my eyes and give this game my credit card number or access to my checking account. And then for each and every whale you lose after that, that is money you will never get back. And not only that, but kind of the stain of being pay to win will permanently mark that game. And it has killed a lot of live service and mobile games over the years. That when people realize that there's just no way you're going to be able to do anything or anywhere close to what someone who can spend hundreds or even thousands of dollars a month in a game can do, why should I even bother to play? And the kind of variety of content in Concept Champions has been one of its strongest points and why it's been able to retain so many people. But with these changes to Prestige and all that, and making it now a factor for the single player or the non-kind of super competitive mode side of things, it is going to be very interesting to see how they navigate this going forward. Because only certain champions are worth like super high prestige. In one of those rare miracle luck moments for me, I pulled the highest prestige character from their Titan bundle or the Titan Crystal banner when it got updated. So I'm potentially, maybe I'll go from the super bottom tier to maybe bottom +1 or maybe even 2. Who knows? I'm sure all of you watching this are going to be, sitting at the edge of your seat waiting for me to update all of you when that happens. To wrap things up for our video, when you are dealing with different communities of your game, it's important to understand what they expect out of the game and to design content that is best suited for them. With Clash of Champions, they put out a lot of late game slash Eververse content that is incredibly difficult. But they also put out content that's kind of on the small and medium tier that can still push an account or a player and get some decent rewards. Dead by Daylight doesn't quite have that, and it feels like for years they've been kind of struggling with this idea of, is this a serious game or not? And I know some of you will be probably laughing about me describing a game where Freddy, Pinhead, Chucky, Michael Myers, and the Predator, or no, the Alien from Alien can all get together and kill hapless survivors. But when you are presenting a game that has different degrees or different skill levels involved with it, people expect to kind of play at these different levels. Again, it's why we talk about games that are have like the casual setting, core, hardcore, grandmaster, esport, and you get the picture. And when you try and put everything together in a blender and hope that it all works out, you're going to be mixing up these player bases. And as we've said, your hardcore players should never be in contact with your light or casual players. It's why we talk about the ELO system for so many of these games. And with something like with Clash of Champions, if you're going to promote your game, there has to be a way forward for someone who's not going to be spending. While obviously you're going to be courting people who will spend money, whether it's a little bit or a lot, there has to be some path forward. There has to be concessions made for someone who is not going to be able to or doesn't want to spend money in your game. And no one's expected to be making the same level of progress within like a week or two. But when the difference is, okay, a paying player can do all this right now, a free player can take a year, 2 years to get to that same point, it's going to be very frustrating. And there's still really no agreed upon standards when it comes to how much money should impact the experience. So the final question for you, can you think of other interesting examples when a community and a developer become at odds with one another? How do they solve it? And do you think that they did the right, wrong, or the only option that they had? And with that, I hope all of you are not going to be riding against me anytime soon. I will see everyone in our next design video. Thanks for watching, and a special thank you to our Patreon supporters. If you enjoyed the video, do the YouTubing stuff, be sure to visit our Discord and Patreon, and you're interested more in my thoughts on design, check out my game design books.